On this September 11th, 20 years since the 9/11 terror attacks. Remembering the day the world changed and set off the war on terror. Paying it forward.
They opened their hearts. We fell in love with them.
One American finds a way to keep the bond strong with the people of Gander. Jody Wilson-Raybould's tell-all, the accusations against her former boss. And win or lose, the world is watching Leila Fernandez.
Global National with Robin Gill.
Michael George Ochinsky.
Garnet A. Spaley.
David Michael Barclay. Kenneth William Besnicki.
24 Canadian names were among the nearly 3,000 read out in New York today, a tribute to the men, women, and children who died 20 years ago in the 9/11 terror attacks. Good evening and thank you for joining us. Memorials were held across the United States and around the world today, marking a tragedy that would change the course of history. On September 11th, 2001, terrorists hijacked commercial planes and launched an attack on the United States that shook our security. As Jennifer Johnson reports, 2 decades later, the memories are just as painful.
Christy A. Adamo.
The names of the lost were remembered at the Ground Zero Memorial. Every one of the more than 2,700 people killed in New York on the morning of September 11th, 2001. 2 moments of silence were held to commemorate when each plane hit the towers. U.S. President Joe Biden attended the somber ceremony, along with former Presidents Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. 2 decades have passed, but for those who lost loved ones, it seems like yesterday.
In the last 20 years, my family and I have at times known unbearable sorrow and disbelief about the lives that would never be.
Firefighters remembered the men and women who died trying to save the lives of others, a city still healing 20 years after the worst terrorist attack on U.S. soil. In Shanksville, Pennsylvania, bells were rung in remembrance by the 2 emergency responders first on the scene after United Airlines Flight 93 went down as passengers tried to stop the terrorists.
It's one thing to say, I know I should step up, another thing to do it. That's genuine heroism.
President Biden chose not to give a nationwide address on this day, but Americans did hear from former President George W. Bush, the nation's leader on 9/11.
The world was loud with carnage and sirens, and then quiet with missing voices that would never be heard again.
A ceremony was held at the Pentagon, too, where terrorists crashed American Airlines Flight 77 into the building that houses the country's top military leaders.
Never forget those who were murdered by terrorists. Never forget those who rushed to save their lives and gave theirs in exchange.
This anniversary comes less than 2 weeks after America's chaotic end of the war in Afghanistan that began after 9/11. A war that killed mastermind Osama bin Laden but left behind other extremists. America's defense secretary, who fought in Afghanistan, promised the job is not over.
It will always be our duty to fulfill their missions and to live up to their goodness.
20 years later, Americans are concerned that al-Qaeda, the terror network behind the 9/11 attacks, will regroup in Afghanistan. The pain of this day remains fresh in millions of minds. With renewed fears, something like this could happen again. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
It was a day of remembrance in several Canadian communities. The town of Gander, Newfoundland marked the day with live performances and a dedication of a piece of steel from the World Trade Center. The town took in nearly 7,000 passengers whose flights were diverted. Turning now to the election campaign. Liberal Leader Justin Trudeau had Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois in his sights today, with stops in the Greater Toronto Area and Quebec. But he couldn't shake an opponent from an earlier time, his former Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould. An excerpt from her new book accuses him of wanting her to lie. Abigail Bimman joins us with more on the allegations. Abigail?
Robin, Jody Wilson-Raybould's book is called Indian in the Cabinet, Speaking Truth to Power. In an excerpt published in the Globe and Mail, she details 2 conversations she had with Justin Trudeau just days before she resigned from cabinet in 2019. Wilson-Raybould writes, he used the line that would later become public, that I had experienced things differently. I knew what he was really asking, what he was saying. In that moment, I knew he wanted me to lie, to attest that what had occurred had not occurred.
I did not want her to lie. I would never do that. I would never ask her that. That is simply not true.
Saturday, Trudeau kept repeating the issue was picked apart before the last election, and it was, in the House, in the media, in committee.
I experienced a consistent and sustained effort by many people within the government to seek to politically interfere.
In August 2019, the Federal Ethics Commissioner found Trudeau had violated conflict of interest rules on the question of whether then Justice Minister and Attorney General Wilson-Raybould faced pressure to interfere in the corruption case against SNC Lavalin. That fall, Wilson-Raybould ran and won as an independent. She's not running again now. Through it all, Trudeau's defense has remained the same.
I'm not going to apologize for standing up for Canadians' jobs. In this case, it was making sure that we were standing up for thousands of jobs.
He evaded questions about the timing of the book release and whether it will affect his campaign.
And it's unfortunate to see how things went from there. And I carry the responsibility for much of it. But I can't let that slow me down.
His campaign certainly didn't slow Saturday, hopping from battlegrounds in Ontario to Quebec, but the release took up oxygen in a tight race.
Shocking, not surprising, because this is what Ms. Jody Wilson-Raybould had been saying for a long time.
Ms. Wilson-Raybould felt pressured to lie from the Prime Minister? That is completely unacceptable.
Wilson-Raybould declined an interview. Her book comes out next week, which means you'll likely hear about it again along the campaign trail, which can't help the Liberals. Robin?
Abigail Bimman reporting tonight. Police in London, Ontario have now laid charges after gravel was thrown at Trudeau earlier this week. He was boarding his bus during a campaign stop when the stones were thrown. 25-year-old Shane Marshall has been charged with 1 count of assault with a weapon. He was a riding president for the People's Party of Canada before being removed in response to the allegations. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole finished up 2 days of campaigning in the Greater Toronto Area today. The Liberals hold the majority of seats in the region. And as our chief political correspondent David Akin explains, O'Toole's pitch to voters there is all about putting someone from the GTA in the Prime Minister's office for the first time.
Now is the time for a Prime Minister from the GTA.
In all its history, Canada has never had a PM from a Greater Toronto Area riding. But Erin O'Toole from the riding of Durham on the eastern fringe of a region best known by its area code, the 905, is bucking to be the first.
It's time Canada had a Prime Minister from the 905, from the GTA. It's time we had a Prime Minister who personally knows and understands the challenges facing our communities. Because I grew up here, raised a family here.
O'Toole, who was once a GO train commuter himself, is pitching support for big public transit projects like new subway lines and new regional rail projects.
His Ottawa knows best approach to housing, transit, inflation, crime, and healthcare is simply not working for GTA workers or their families.
For more than a decade, perhaps even longer, reducing commute times has been a top topic for all campaigning politicians. But O'Toole has not provided funding in the platform for the billions these projects would cost. And of course, their completion would depend heavily on a provincial government and local governments. Robin?
David Akin in Whitby, Ontario. For more on the Conservative campaign and the party's change in tactics, let's go to Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa. Hi, Mercedes.
Hi, Robin. So, the Conservatives are really looking in this campaign for where they can find swing voters, and that has largely been a move towards the center. Some have criticized that, saying there's policy flip-flops, or if you don't like what Erin O'Toole has to say, just wait 5 minutes and he'll change his position. But other Conservatives say, look, this is a pragmatic move to try to get people who are not hardcore Liberal voters to vote with the party. Mr. O'Toole has been saying the party has changed and that people can trust it. I sat down with him and asked him what he meant by that. Here's what he had to say. What does it mean when you say the Conservative Party has changed and you could trust us? Were you untrustworthy before? Did you feel this didn't appeal to Canadians? Take us through that message.
We did need to reestablish trust. Obviously, we lost the last 2 elections, and in some areas,
particularly for folks here in the GTA, they didn't see us putting up policy that met their expectations, say on the environment and climate change, for example.
So that's Mr. O'Toole. He'll be on the show tomorrow, the second in our series of leaders interviews. Robin?
Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa. Thanks, Mercedes. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is laying out the cost of his campaign promises. He's the last of the three major party leaders to put a price tag on his platform. Global's Richard Zussman is here to break it down for us. Richard?
Robin, 9 days until Election Day, and finally, the NDP releasing that costed platform. And the promise from NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is that taxes will not go up for the middle class.
Wait a mic drop.
It is the backbone of the NDP's fiscal plan. Tax the rich.
I'm proud to say that we are the only party that has a plan that will ensure that we are not going to put any extra burden on working class people, on the middle class.
The NDP, the last of the big three parties to release a costed platform from the Parliamentary Budget Officer. More than $40 billion in new spending and investments next year alone. A big part of paying for it, a wealth tax. 1% tax on every penny over $10 million an individual Canadian earns, forecast to bring in $10.9 billion next year. There is $14.6 billion in an excess profit tax coming in for companies who made more during the pandemic than before it, and billions more in capital gains and corporate tax changes.
It is a real path forward that's going to start asking those at the very, very, very top to start paying their fair share.
And this is where the money will go. Billions more for childcare, the Canada Recovery Benefit, employment insurance, and to compensate families for Indigenous children who were taken away from them after 2006. There's $68 billion over 5 years for new healthcare spending, including billions for dental coverage, a pharmacare plan starting in 2022-23, and a critical health workers fund.
I am proud to say we are the party that is offering the highest amount of transfers for healthcare. It should not be a surprise.
As for balanced budgets, even 10 years down the road, they're nowhere to be seen in the plan.
There's a path. And our path is that path to get to that point should be about increasing revenue, making sure that the ultra wealthy are paying more of their fair share like they used to. And we are the only ones laying out a credible path to getting to a position where we're in balance that doesn't actually help to people or put burden back on the same people that have struggled.
Now it's about selling the costed platform. Singh and the NDP will head through Ontario to hit a number of swing ridings starting on Sunday. Robin?
Richard Zussman in Vancouver. In Newfoundland and Labrador, they're cleaning up from Hurricane Larry. Larry was a Category 1 storm when it came ashore with 120-kilometer-an-hour winds. Heavy rain and a high storm surge along the coast. It knocked out power to about 60,000 customers at one point. But Larry didn't linger long. The fast-moving storm is now post-tropical and well out to sea, headed toward Greenland, where it's expected to bring significant snowfall. Coming up, the battle of the teens at the U.S. Open. It was an exciting day on the tennis court at the U.S. Open. 19-year-old Leylah Fernandez made it all the way to the final match after becoming one of the tournament's breakout stars. She may have lost her match against another teen sensation, but as Mike Drolet explains, Fernandez's future is bright.
Teenagers slugging it out in the U.S. Open final. Has Gen Z arrived or what? On one side of the net, Montreal-born Leylah Fernandez, and on the other, the UK's Emma Raducanu, who was born in Toronto. For 2 weeks, they've captivated New York's fickle tennis fans. Sadly, the magic had to end for one, and while Fernandez fell short in the final, she's still only 19 years old.
I hope to be back here in the finals, and this time with a trophy. With the right one, with the right trophy. Come on.
Fernandez was a long shot to get here, but nobody can say she didn't earn it.
Nice!
Her family made sacrifices. With finances tight, her mother moved to California to work for 3 years, which allowed her dad to coach her, and she stayed focused, even as the naysayers tried to convince her to quit.
They kept saying no, that I'm not gonna be a professional tennis player, that I should stop and just pursue going to school.
She came up to me and she was really hurt about it. You know, she was really,
I noticed that it really touched her really deeply.
Well, now she can smile, not that she hasn't been all along, and begin reaping the rewards, provided she proves she has staying power.
You can buy on hype and then you lose on results later on. So the endorsements can be performance related. I mean, you basically had two people in the final at the US Open that both came out of nowhere. But will they continue to be at that top level?
We've seen it before. Eugenie Bouchard looked like the next big thing, until she wasn't, and lost big deals with Coke and Nike. It's now Leylah Fernandez's turn to play with fame. Let's hope she serves up an ace. Mike Drollet, Global News, Toronto.
Still ahead, veterans and their families grapple with the legacy of 9/11. This is the first anniversary of 9/11 without U.S. troops in Afghanistan. It's only been a few weeks since the American withdrawal, and for those who served, today is especially painful. As Jackson Proskow reports, they're struggling to come to terms with a 20-year war effort that was erased in a matter of days.
From the ashes of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon rose America's longest war. A grieving nation sought to find those responsible and stop another attack.
9/11 is always hard for me.
Tom Amenta served 2 tours in Afghanistan in 2002 and 2004. He risked his life with pride and purpose.
We had a high-value target list of people that were directly responsible for 9/11, and we were going to find them, and we were going to either capture or kill them. That was it.
2 decades later, the end of the U.S. mission carries far less clarity. Afghanistan is back under Taliban control. There's not a single U.S. troop on the ground.
The truth is I can't get around the fact that I absolutely believe that something bad is going to come back out of that country in the next 7 to 10 years.
For many veterans and their families, this September 11th feels more painful. Grief mixed with anger and one lingering question. Was the war worth it?
I do not feel that my son died in vain. I think it's important for me to make that clear.
Jill Stevenson's son Ben was just 13 when he watched the Twin Towers fall. From that point on, he vowed to serve his country, becoming an Army Ranger. He was killed in a firefight with the Taliban in 2009 at age 21.
It's very sad and maddening to watch 20 years of blood, sweat, and tears of our military just get wiped off, wiped away in the blink of an eye. Making it worse, rubbing salt into that wound for me is that it comes on the heels of the 20th anniversary of 9/11.
Dr. Shelley Amen served in the U.S. Army before becoming a psychiatrist who works with veterans.
People are feeling it acutely right now.
On this September 11th, she encourages veterans and their families to find support and know that healing is possible.
They're really feeling like their post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms are flared up. They're feeling a deep sense of betrayal in a lot of ways.
Nearly 2 decades after he left Afghanistan, that's what motivates Tom Amenta. He has worked to document the stories of those who served, hoping to use this grim anniversary to remember what was gained, not lost, in America's longest war.
We kept the world safe around the world, not just Americans, but Canadians, the Aussies, everyone in NATO, everybody who stepped into that country and said 9/11 will not happen again.
Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
Up next, giving back to Gander. "20 years ago, less than 10,000 people were living in the town of Gander. On September 11th, that population grew by nearly 7,000. Dubbed 9/11's plain people, travelers suddenly found themselves grounded in this small Canadian town. But they were made to feel more than welcome. And one American woman keeps returning to repay their kindness. Here's Ross Lord.
It takes a special energy to travel more than 24 hours from Ohio to Newfoundland and Labrador at age 85. But Shirley Brooks-Jones is determined to keep saying thank you to the people of Gander and surrounding communities.
I mean, they didn't have to do what they did for us. They could have just looked the other way. They could have said, oh, well, somebody else can take care of them, but they didn't.
Shirley and almost 7,000 other passengers were stranded in the Gander area after the 9/11 terrorist attacks.
Those Newfoundlanders were absolutely awesome. They opened their hearts, their homes, their churches, their service clubs. I mean, in a few days, we fell in love with them. We truly did.
For 20 years, the love affair has continued.
You gotta keep moving on.
Shirley has made dozens of trips back to Gander and Lewisport to hand out the Flight 15 scholarship from a fund she initiated.
A big smile on her face. I want at all times into the future for the people of that area to know that we would never forget what they had done for us.
Live life!
Hundreds of high school students have qualified for the scholarship, including Raylene Kirby on her path to becoming a family doctor.
I don't know if Shirley will ever know what a role model she's been in my life as a strong female leader and just a beautiful person overall.
They're eating and sleeping in the same area.
Shirley's best friends in Lewisport, Bill and Thelma Hooper, are excited to see her again.
She's just one of our family now, really.
As a concession to COVID-19, this visit is different.
I've already told her that, no, we're not allowed, not supposed to hug or even shake hands.
For Shirley, it's hard to hold back.
Eventually, I'm going to touch your arm or your face or something else, but hugging, that's something, if things are good or bad or whatever, hugs, and not being able to hug, it just about kills you.
But even the pandemic doesn't dampen her enthusiasm for giving back.
I love those people. I'll love them. Even when I die, I'll love them. I'll come back and
2 decades of kinship and counting. Ross Lord, Global News, Lewisport, Newfoundland and Labrador.
And that is Global National for this Saturday night. Thank you for watching. I'm Robin Gill. We leave you tonight with today's memorials to the victims of the 9/11 attacks. It was a day that will never be forgotten. Good night.